They see you coming and they don't flinch. That's the problem. You walk into a room and people make their assessment in 3 seconds. They file you away. They decide what you're worth, what you're capable of, where you belong in the hierarchy. And here's what nobody will tell you. Most of you are letting that happen. Most of you are handing people the weapon they use against you every single day. You think being recognized is power. You think being taken seriously is the goal. You think the moment someone underestimates you, you've lost something. You haven't lost anything. You've just been handed the most dangerous advantage in existence, and you don't even know how to use it. Once you understand what I'm about to show you, you will never interact with another human being the same way again. You will stop fighting for recognition. You will stop performing competence. You will stop trying to be seen. Because you'll finally understand that the most powerful people in any room are the ones nobody fully understands. This is not motivation. This is architecture. By the end of this, you will have a framework for operating in a world that is constantly trying to neutralize you. Keep watching. The invisible enemy is not the person who doubts you. It's not the boss who passed you over. It's not the competitor who laughed. The invisible enemy is your own desperate need to be understood. Most people are running on this biological script they never questioned. They need to be seen. They need approval to confirm they exist. They need external validation to feel that what they're doing matters. And that script, that unconscious hunger, is the thing that exposes them every single time. The average person will sacrifice strategic advantage just to feel respected in a moment. Think about that. They will tip their hand. They will reveal their plans. They will fight petty battles for optics. They will overperform, overcommunicate, over-explain, just to make sure everyone in the room knows who they are. And every single time they do that, they give away intelligence. They tell people what they fear. They show people what matters to them. They hand their enemies a map. Weak men argue for respect. Powerful men make respect irrelevant. This is the illusion that controls most people's lives, that power comes from being acknowledged. It doesn't. Power comes from operating in the gap between what people think you are and what you actually are. That gap is your weapon. That gap is where strategy lives. And most people spend their entire lives trying to close that gap when they should be widening it. They want you anxious about perception. They want you performing for every audience. They want you legible, predictable, categorized, easy to manage. A person who is easy to read is a person who is easy to control. And right now, most of you are an open book. 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli watched princes collapse, not from lack of power, not from lack of resources, but from lack of patience. He watched men fight for reputation when they should have been building position. He watched them reveal strategy for the sake of glory when they should have moved in silence and claimed the outcome. Machiavelli understood something that the moralists of his time refused to accept. The world does not reward the virtuous. It rewards the prepared. It rewards the ones who understand human psychology well enough to let people underestimate them, while they build something those people cannot yet see. He wrote about the lion and the fox. The lion has strength. The fox has cunning. But Machiavelli said the prince who relies only on the lion will not survive, because traps are not defeated with strength. They are defeated with awareness, patience, and the willingness to appear smaller than you are until the moment you are not. History does not remember the loudest man in the room. History remembers the man who was still standing when everyone else had burned themselves out. That's the game. And you are about to learn how to play it. Here is what you are going to become after this. You are going to become someone who cannot be read. Someone who people consistently underestimate, not because you are small, but because you have learned to control what you reveal. You will become strategically invisible in the moments when visibility is a liability. You will develop the emotional discipline to sit inside other people's low expectations and build from there. Quietly. Methodically. Without announcement. You will stop performing for people who don't matter. You will stop defending yourself to people who have already decided. You will stop trying to correct every misconception because you'll realize that misconceptions are one of the most powerful forms of cover that exist. You will become untouchable, not because no one can reach you, but because no one fully knows what they're dealing with. After this, you will look at every social dynamic differently. Every room you walk into, you will see the architecture of perception and you will know exactly where your advantage lives. You cannot go back from this. Let's build it. Number 1. Your silence is not absence. It is accumulation. The first thing you must understand is that most people have been taught to interpret silence as weakness. No response means no power. Saying nothing means you have nothing. And so they fill every silence. They over-explain. They justify. They reassure. They perform activity to signal relevance. This is exactly the mistake that keeps them small. When you stop explaining yourself, something shifts in the room. People don't know what to do with unexplained silence. It creates cognitive dissonance. It makes you harder to categorize. And the human mind is deeply uncomfortable with things it cannot categorize. Think about the last time someone disrespected you. What did you do? Most people respond immediately. They defend. They escalate. They make sure the other person knows they're not to be messed with. And in doing so, they reveal exactly how much that moment affected them. They show they're wound. They hand the other person a lever. The man who doesn't respond is far more frightening than the man who fights back instantly. Because nobody knows what the quiet man is planning. Nobody knows where his limits actually are. Nobody knows when he's going to move. Silence is accumulation. Every time you resist the urge to react, you are storing energy. You are building strategic reserve. You are allowing the other person to overextend themselves while you observe. The most powerful men in any situation are the ones who speak least and mean most. Their words land like stone because they don't dilute them with noise. Write this down. Let people underestimate your silence. Your silence is not absence. It is everything you haven't done yet. Number 2. Underestimation is not an insult. It is camouflage. This is where most people break. Someone looks past them. Someone dismisses their idea. Someone treats them as irrelevant. And the ego fires, hot, immediate, consuming. They want to correct that perception. They want to make the person see. They want justice for being overlooked. And the moment that impulse takes over, they have lost. Because what just happened was not an attack. It was an opening. When someone underestimates you, they lower their guard. They stop tracking you. They stop accounting for your moves. They stop preparing for your response. They have removed you from the category of threat. And you, if you are strategic, stay there. You let them believe what they believe. You let the low expectation exist. Because that expectation is the wall between you and their full resistance. Napoleon moved armies through terrain his enemies thought was impassable because his enemies thought it was impossible. They weren't watching. They weren't preparing. By the time they understood what was happening, the position was taken. The person who nobody sees coming is the most dangerous person in the room. Think about your own life. The opportunities you've had. The relationships. The professional situations. In how many of them did you rush to assert your value before you had built your position? How many times did you announce your intention before your execution was complete? How many times did you make noise when you should have been making moves? Camouflage is not cowardice. Camouflage is precision. You are not hiding because you are afraid. You are operating below the threshold of resistance so you can build without interference. Comment: I move in silence. Number 3. People reveal themselves to those they do not fear. Use this. Social dynamics are an intelligence operation. Information flows constantly, through conversation, behavior, reaction, body language, what people say when they're comfortable, what they avoid saying when they're threatened. And the majority of this information only becomes visible when the person speaking doesn't consider you a serious player. When people fear you, they manage themselves. They are careful. They are calculated. They give you a curated version of who they are. But when they dismiss you, they relax. They talk freely. They show you their priorities, their insecurities, their real alliances, their actual opinion of the people around them. They tell you who to trust and who is running a play on you, not with explicit words, but with the carelessness they show in your presence. The underestimated person sits in rooms that powerful people think are private. They are in conversations that never happen in front of someone who is perceived as a threat. They have access to intelligence that the visible, assertive, loud players never get. Think about every organization, every social circle, every family dynamic you have ever been part of. There is always someone who is overlooked, dismissed, filed away as non-threatening. And that person, if they are paying attention, knows more about the actual dynamics of that group than anyone else in it. Most people use that position to complain. The strategic person uses it to build an advantage that becomes devastating when the moment of execution arrives. Stop trying to be feared prematurely. Let people underestimate you. Let them talk. Let them be careless in your presence. And listen. Map everything. Build the intelligence. The fear comes later, when it is earned and when it lands with full force. Burn this into your mind. The people who dismiss you are giving you their secrets. The only question is whether you are paying attention. Number 4. Low expectations are the only leverage you need to overdeliver catastrophically. Here is the mathematics of reputation. When people expect much from you and you deliver, they are satisfied. There is no compounding. There is no asymmetric response. It is simply what was expected, met. But when people expect nothing from you, or worse, expect failure, and you execute with precision, the psychological impact is disproportionate to the actual event. It doesn't feel like success. It feels like the ground moved. It feels like a restructuring of reality. Because their entire model of who you are has to be rebuilt from scratch. That restructuring creates a specific kind of respect. Not the kind that fades. The kind that is anchored in shock. In recalibration. In the visceral experience of being wrong about someone in a fundamental way. Low expectations are leverage. Every time someone writes you off, they have just handed you the conditions for a maximum impact delivery. The question is whether you are patient enough to wait for the right moment. Whether you are disciplined enough not to announce what you're building. Whether you can tolerate the discomfort of being underestimated long enough to let the gap between expectation and reality become as wide as possible. Most people can't do it. The ego won't allow it. The ego wants credit now. It wants acknowledgement in real time. It wants people to see the work as it's being done. The strategic person cares about one thing, the outcome. Not the process. Not the acknowledgement. The outcome. And they will tolerate almost anything if it means the outcome land harder. If this resonates, subscribe. You're exactly where you need to be. Number 5. You control the narrative by refusing to participate in it. Every social environment runs on narrative. People are constantly constructing stories about who you are, what your motives are, where you're going, what you're capable of. These stories are built from the data you give them. Every action you take, every statement you make, every reaction you show is raw material for the narrative that other people are building about you. Most people try to manage this narrative by inserting themselves into it, correcting misperceptions, defending their reputation, making sure the story that circulates is the one they prefer. And in doing so, they participate in a system that was never designed to give them full control. The moment you engage with the narrative, you give it power. You confirm that the narrative matters. You confirm that other people's perception of you is something you are dependent on. But the person who steps outside the narrative, who refuses to explain, defend, or perform for the story, becomes something that the narrative cannot capture. Uncontrollable. Unmanageable. A variable that the social system doesn't know what to do with. Machiavelli understood that the prince who was fully legible was fully vulnerable. The prince whose motives were unclear, whose movements were unpredictable, whose internal state was unreadable, that prince held a strategic advantage that no amount of force could overcome. Because you cannot neutralize what you cannot fully understand. Stop correcting people's perception of you. Let some of the wrong stories circulate. Let people think they have you figured out. And while they are managing their story about you, you will be executing something they never saw coming. Say it with me: the narrative is not your responsibility. Your results are. Number 6. Every dismissal is a transaction. Know what you're collecting. Every time someone dismisses you, something is being transferred. Not taken from you, transferred to you. They are depositing obligation into an account that you are keeping. This is not vengeance. Vengeance is reactive. Vengeance is emotional. Vengeance is loud. What I am describing is something colder. Something more structural. When someone writes you off, when they take the shortcut of dismissal instead of the work of actual assessment, they create an asymmetry. They have declared themselves certain of your limitations. And certainty, in a dynamic and uncertain world, is always a liability. You know something they don't. You know they are wrong. And that knowledge is not a wound. It is a countdown. The strategic person lets that countdown run. They don't accelerate it with emotional reaction. They don't interrupt it with noise. They let it build. They build their capability. They sharpen their execution. They wait for the moment when the gap between what was assumed and what is actual becomes impossible to ignore. And when that moment arrives, they don't gloat. They don't announce victory. They don't make speeches about how far they've come. They simply present the outcome. Clean. Undeniable. Inevitable. The dismissal was the beginning of a transaction. You just decided what the final settlement would be. Write this down. Every person who underestimated you has made a promise to the future. They just don't know it yet. Now we reach the final conversion. The part of this that most people will not accept, because accepting it requires you to kill something. You have been living inside a version of yourself that needs to be seen to feel real. A version that performs for external validation because without it, the identity starts to feel unstable. A version that flinches when dismissed, that accelerates when applauded, that is fundamentally driven by what other people think. That version of you is not power. That version of you is a mechanism of control, built for you by every social environment you have ever moved through, designed to keep you predictable, manageable, legible. That version of you must die. Not metaphorically. Not gradually. Executed. Deliberately. The way you execute a bad strategy, not with regret, but with clarity about why it no longer serves you. The new architecture is this. You operate from internal metrics only. Not from applause, not from dismissal, not from perception. You measure yourself against your own standards, your own trajectory, your own execution. Other people's assessments become data, not verdicts. You stop performing competence and start building it. Quietly. Ruthlessly. Without announcement. You stop asking for access and start making your presence undeniable. Not through noise. Through outcomes. You stop defending your reputation and start building a record that makes defense unnecessary. This is not a shift in behavior. This is a shift in identity. The old version was reactive, validation dependent, and fundamentally controlled by external input. The new version is self-directed, strategic, and moves on its own timeline. You don't ask permission. You don't wait for endorsement. You don't need the room to recognize you before you begin. You have already begun. The person watching this who understood everything I just said is not the same person who pressed play. Something has been recalibrated. Not dramatically. Not with noise. Quietly, the way the most important changes always happen. You have been given a different lens. And once you see social dynamics through this lens, you cannot unsee it. You will walk into rooms differently. You will hold your silence differently. You will receive dismissal differently. You will understand that the person who is not being watched is the person who is most free to move. You are not building toward recognition. You are building toward undeniability. There is a difference. Recognition can be withheld. Undeniability cannot. Let them underestimate you. Let them file you away. Let them believe they have you figured out. And build. In silence. With patience. Without explanation. The outcome is the only statement that has ever mattered. Comment: I move in silence. I execute.